Sure. All good. Awesome. Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name's Corey Pierce, and I'm the Marketing Director here at Churn Zero, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar titled Why High Touch and Tech Touch Should Be Friends, Not Enemies. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you that we are recording this session, and a link to the recording will be available 24 hours after this webinar. Throughout the presentation, you're welcome to submit your questions via the questions tab, and we'll try and answer them as we go. We'll also address as many questions as we can during the Q&A portion at the end of this webinar. Now I'm pleased to introduce to you our presenters for today, who are all from our friends over at ESG, which is an agency that delivers customer success as a service. First, we have Marley Wagner, who is the Senior Director of Marketing and Services at ESG. She leads both their go-to-market strategy as well as their digital customer success practice. We're also joined by Britt Lehman, who is the CS Ops Manager at ESG. Britt is one that you might call a student of the game, as he's spent 10 years learning, developing, and putting into practice the philosophy of CS at startups and enterprise level orgs. And last but not least, we have Madeline Evans, who is not on webcam right now, but we will be hearing from her shortly. And she's a digital CSM at ESG with 8 years of experience, which makes her a perfect person for us to be talking to today on all things tech touch and digital CS. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Marley, to get our discussion started today.
Awesome. Thanks, Corey, and thank you so much for having us. We're super excited to be talking about this topic. As you mentioned, in our work environment at ESG, we have the pleasure of seeing a ton of different organizations go through really intense, fascinating digital transformations. So I think we have some interesting stories and tips and tricks to be able to share. So before we get into it, I want to start off by just kind of making sure everyone on this webinar today is starting from the same place and we understand kind of where you guys are. So I think we have a poll to launch right off the bat here. So everyone should be seeing this momentarily. I want to hear from you whether or not you are currently utilizing any form of automation or tech touch with any of your customer segments. So it doesn't matter, you know, if it's your SMBs or your enterprise business. Want to know if you're using that today. We'll give everybody a minute here. Okay, so looks like little over half are saying yes, 59% yes, 41% no. So that's really helpful context. About what I expected, somewhere around half and half. So that will help inform what we talk through today. Want to, like I said, start off, make sure everybody's starting from the same place of understanding. So there's a lot of terminology thrown around in customer success in general, but I think especially when we get into this digital space, you'll hear a ton of different terms used, right? So want to start off with that context of what we mean when we say high touch, what we mean when we say tech touch. So I'm going to ask Madeline, who, as Corey mentioned, is having some technical difficulties with her camera, but we should be able to hear her just fine. And I'm going to have Madeline just quickly walk us through, you know, the historical context of what we mean in a high touch versus tech touch model, and then start thinking about some new ways to think about those terms as well.
Yeah, definitely. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so for starters, I definitely think it's worthwhile to call attention to the way in which many companies and professionals have historically thought about high touch and tech touch customer engagement models, and really even in our not so distant past. The high touch customer segment and engagement model has traditionally been associated with large stakes and high revenue customers. So this typically has included highly personalized customer experience, which looks a lot like one-to-one direct human engagement with a dedicated CSM and your typical white glove model. Additionally, I would say a ton of customization has been allocated primarily to the high touch customer, right? While tech touch, on the other hand, has previously been viewed as a highly automated experience. So embracing a one CSM to many approach associated with lower tier customers like SMBs and low revenue business. But I think we can really get at a key point here, which is we don't need to view high touch and tech touch as mutually exclusive. They actually can be one and the same, right? In the sense that these segments both have the opportunity to adopt a scalable digital approach. Automation and digital scale does not have to be exclusively tailored at the tech touch level.
Yeah, I'll jump in kind of on that point. Madeline's really talking about like a hybrid approach to, I guess, the engagement model overall when we're talking about how we talk to customers, when we talk to customers. In a traditional high touch sense, you're really only maintaining relationships, like she said, one-on-one. It's all based on me as the CSM, where automation or tech touch, and we kind of are going to use this a little interchangeably today. Automation really helps you build some fundamentals in place. And I think there's probably this sense of it's all or nothing one way or the other. Like she's kind of addressing a little bit, like if I do tech touch, then it's only ever going to fit with my customers who fall in a certain bucket or have certain criteria. But what we're talking about is like a hybridization almost, where you still can provide that white glove approach, but you can roll in automations into customers of that tier. You can also still segment your customers out however you want and add what levels of automation that you need to in there. Tech touch still being all about driving efficiency overall, right? So like what ways can we get more efficient in our processes? And then high touch all about that customer and human experience back to back. So blending together really helps you kind of like formulate a strategy for your overall engagement process rather than thinking, oh, it's got to be one way or the other. We're really saying that you can do it both and not to be afraid of it.
I think that's a really good point, Britt, right? I think people hear the word automation or digital, and that can be a really scary term, especially for customer success leaders who are like, no, I have this awesome team of CSMs. They worked so hard to build these very, very deep, very personalized relationships with my customers. Like, it can feel super scary, and that's understandable to think about changing that, right? But we see, we've seen a ton of companies who are in that scenario. They're like, my team is great, they're crushing it, they're growing my customers, my churn is low, like we're doing awesome, but oh my gosh, we're growing and we need to scale, and like, I don't know how to do that by just throwing bodies at this problem, right? So I think I kind of gave away the answer there, but my next question for you is, can you talk a little bit about sort of the when and why a company would want to start considering incorporating automation or digital into an existing white glove model?
Yeah, as we were thinking about this over the last couple of weeks, there are really three areas of when, and then the whys that are associated with them that came to mind. The first one is when your CSMs start talking about their time spend, and Marla, you kind of started to address it a little bit. It's like, yeah, we're doing really great in the way we've been managing stuff. Churn is low, our processes seem to be on fire, but then all of a sudden, as you start scaling, you start having less and less time. CSMs are telling you that they're getting burnt out, and then that would be the why, right? Is to avoid that burnout. So that's the first one. The second one that comes to mind is like when you just want to create some standardization. So kind of like the next layer beyond that is, well, we have Rockstar team, but they're all still kind of doing everything in their own way. There's a lot of tribal knowledge. There's a lot of experience that maybe isn't getting transferred. So you say, all right, well, we want to standardize on some of our processes. The way that we can do that is building in automated touch points, and we'll talk about like how you do that here in a minute. And then the why to that is moving away from tribal knowledge. It helps you really narrow down maybe some like risk areas or sticking points with your customer experience and customer engagement along the way. Maybe you've never done customer journey mapping. It's a great way to kind of start identifying those areas in which a customer might not just touch your sales team, but your CS team, your support team, all around in just kind of their entire journey process. And then so that's kind of the second one. The third one is like Marley said, when you're gearing up to grow or you are growing. This is a little more strategic in thought process. You don't want to just necessarily react to it, but all right, well, we want to think towards what the next year or 2 years, 3 years looks like for us, so we can make a strategic decision to start building out some of our process, automate some of that process around not just the actual customer engagement points, like not just what you're sending to your customers, but also what you're sending to your CS to say, oh, well, now I know I have some action item to do at this time frame, and I can automate some of those points along my experience as a CS to say, all right, well, I can expect that this week I'm going to have X number of outreaches that I need to do. And then that still is the human touch on me to say, well, I'm going to actually do this outreach. It's not going to be something that's automated to the customer, but is in and of itself an automation in the sense that I'm creating some kind of something action item to me. We call them CTAs in the industry. You might have heard that term before. And a lot of the tools that are out there can trigger these calls to action for your CS.
Exactly. I think that's a really good point, Britt. I think, again, when people throw around terms like high touch and tech touch, we, traditionally think of, okay, this is how we're engaging with our customers, right? I think it doesn't have to always mean that. When we think about automation, there certainly can be internal facing automation that sometimes make even the biggest impact, right? Maybe you still do want to have those conversations one-on-one with your customers. Great. Those CSMs have worked so hard for those relationships. We want them to keep having them, but how do we make their jobs easier? How do we enable them to have more time, to your point, to have more time to have those strategic conversations? So, okay, I want to imagine a scenario that, we're a company and we've decided, all right, we're crossing this threshold. We've gotten over our fear of incorporating automation and we're ready to get started. But that can look like a giant sea of options and be really hard to narrow down where to start, right? So Madeline, will you jump in here and just talk to us about how you would think about getting started, both from, actual customer facing automation that can be incorporated even in a high touch environment, or some of those internal automations that Britt alluded to as well.
Yeah. So now, let's say you've decided to take on a full digital approach. So where do you get started? So integrating your customer list and CRM are obviously great first starters, but there's some quick wins that I always recommend for how to just jump right in and get started. So for like low-hanging fruit to get started with digital automation for your customer base, consider messaging that goes out to all customers. That's a great place to start. So what kind of digital communication do all of your customers receive? Think about emails that require no data. It's the same message for every customer. So this could look like your subscription welcome email, a product update, feature highlight, a customer newsletter, a quick thank you, anything that you would want to get out to all customers. That's very low hanging fruit and a great starting point. So that's a quick win with messaging. And when it comes to automation, I think it's important to think about repetitive manual tasks that your CSMs are performing on a daily basis. So to me, streamlining task management is definitely one of the best, hands down, nuggets when it comes to automation as a whole. So I like to approach it this way. Start by asking what manual tasks your CSMs are repeating over and over. What are CSMs habitually tracking and recording daily and manually in your CRM? And then consider examples where task management could be more efficient if automation stepped in. So areas, for example, here could include intro emails to the customer, internal warm handoffs, sales to CSM team syncs. All of that could be supported by automation. And You can take away the manual effort of tracking down the next customer meeting time or remind customers of an upcoming meeting in advance. So scheduling reminders are a perfect example of outreach and tasks that could be easily automated and save a ton of time. Also, think about automating outreach for customer check-ins. At a minimum, you could be automating a CSM outreach to make sure you're talking with customers at least once per quarter. Another area here could be knowledge transfer, right? So that's awesome for quick task efficiency. For instance, automate processes to ensure you're syncing on knowledge transfer upon customer onboarding, or alert CSMs on important customer notes. Automation can also even step in if you have missing knowledge transfer items too. And internally, think about notifications that can be set up where automation can step in for the completion of those regular routine tasks. So like a customer status or performance review, say you haven't heard from a customer in X days, you could alert CSMs to take a look at performance metrics and so forth. Also consider churn risk alerts too. CSMs and internal team members can be auto notified when customers approach the risk of churn, or auto alert a CSM if a customer has dropped in a leading health score KPI. So that's like a big list of examples. So I would say start with a couple there. But those are all really, I would say, simple, quick wins that don't really require a ton of fancy data work or that like if, then, and configuration logic. So I'd start by taking a stab at messaging where all customers are receiving the same engagement, and then prioritize where you can actually make your CSM's lives easier. So what are their manual pain points, and how can automation step in? And then thereafter, I mean, you can absolutely go beyond that. So once you've explored more so quick and basic avenues for automation, you can then move forward in more advanced areas like defining and configuring customer journey mapping, designating playbooks and workflows to each journey stage. You can create customer health score definitions and apply health scoring to customers in real time and continuously monitor health across many systems and data points, and set up risk mitigation functionality and consider in-app messaging and beyond. But I highly suggest starting with what's in front of you. There's a lot of fundamental areas that you could tackle first. That really doesn't have to be overwhelming, and that's a great place to jump in. And we do have an infographic to share that speaks to customer automation maturity, and that highlights messaging and task management as that quick, low-hanging fruit and a great place to get started, and then areas for future automation progression. Corey, if we want to take a look at that now.
Just pulling it up as we speak.
Perfect. Thanks, Corey. Yeah, so to Madeline's point, as you can see, this infographic, we have it broken down into 4 stages of maturity when it comes to digital CS. Really, most of what we're talking about today falls into either phase 1 or phase 2 of this visual here, right? So whether we're talking about email campaigns that are, largely generalized, right? Things that Madeline mentioned, like simple welcome emails, product updates, those kinds of things. Those are super quick, easy, really nice quick wins. And then those CSM tasks and internal notifications and all of that just make such a big difference on the time spend that your CSMs have. It really is super powerful, right? So we're not going to spend a lot of time today talking about sort of the right-hand side of your screen right now. We're not going to talk a lot about self-service or about sort of advanced fancy channels, because I think, you know, when we're talking about using automation in a more high-touch environment, I think the basics are really the keys to success here, right? You know, if we're talking about a company that has a really high volume of low dollar customers, they may need all 4 of these phases to be able to reach all those customers, right? But if that's not your model, all these may not apply. So we really are gonna stay focused on this left-hand side for today's conversation. And we'll make sure this infographic is available after the webinar as well, but just wanted to quick pull it up for reference. So Corey, thank you for sharing that. Want to move on now to talk about some examples, Britt and Madeline, that you've both seen of how automation has really made both CSMs and CS leaders' lives easier, right? How it's complemented that human interaction. So Britt, I think you had a story to tell first, and Corey, we're good to, yeah, pull that down. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of moving away from hypotheticals and theoreticals and into like real life examples here. A previous company I was working at was a SaaS company. We were a cloud services organization. We were really focused on that customer acquisition space. When we start talking about scale and growth, when you start thinking like beyond just like we're past a little bit of that startup space, and now we're working into how do we go get the unicorn? There's a lot of companies that are out there like that. But for us, what that meant was our team of 6 was getting about 30 new accounts every month or so. Our sales team was rock stars. I mean, they were just like pounding the pavement, and we were able to bring in all these new acquisitions. But as a team of 6, that meant that our account sizes when we first started, I had about 100 accounts when I started, and by the end of the first year, I had well over 200. The rate at which we were growing meant that we had to do one of 2 things: either accommodate all of our customers with that same white glove treatment that we were giving previous customers, which is absolutely something you do, especially in early startup phases, or you start trying to scale with what your customer need is. So yes, I can manage 200 accounts, but how do I manage 200 accounts? The way we started out doing it in the beginning, before we had adopted any automation or even a CS tool, was like spreadsheets, and trying to look through all of my notes in a spreadsheet for each customer that I was maintaining. Yes, I can keep notes in a CRM, but like trying to keep track of when the last time I was that I even talked to them was just a nightmare. So like the way that automation made my job easier, like specifically then, was automating just some of those manual task outreaches, and then also like the knowledge transfer that we were talking about earlier. I didn't have to keep all of that stuff either in my head or on a spreadsheet. It was actually trackable in our tool. And then beyond that, getting the notification reminder to say, hey, it's time to reach out to these 10 customers. It's been, 3 weeks or a month or however long that you didn't talk to them, or even once a quarter. And I think that was another thing that we were talking about, is like automating things like quarterly check-ins or QBRs. Ultimately, what we want to do in providing this space, and this was what kind of happened for us, was by freeing up the time spent that I had trying to manage all of those accounts very manually, I was able to then spend a little bit more time being more strategic. So moving away from maybe reactionary touch points and engagements with customers to proactive, but then more than proactive, actually then starting to move beyond just talking about like our speeds and feeds and some of the quick responses that we might have, into a more strategic conversation and developing that relationship. So like QBRs became less about like a, hey, it's been 3 months since we talked, and became more about like a, hey, how do we help you guys go achieve some of your goals, and how can we partner with you together? So that was just a very long-winded way of saying for me, like it specifically helped me with time management, then also knowing my customers better. That was the big thing.
Great point.
I'll add to that too. I think for me, I've seen really how taking a step away from manual email effort is a huge time saver for CSMs. And I know automating email can be and seem, when you're first starting out, a little bit daunting, but there are definitely some helpful ways that I think that has really helped make the CSM's life easier by adding personalization and customer relevance that you can leverage to automate your emails and to have them actually come across as tailored uniquely to that customer and or your CSM. So for instance, you can include the customer name or business name in email content through field mapping or with email tokens, and do the same for the customization of the sender. So messaging could come from the CSM directly. So for example, including your CSM Britt Lehman in the email signature versus using a standard generic email footer. Also thinking about enabling the message reply to go directly to the CSM rather than your typical no reply sender. I've seen like plain text emails always work well for perceived personalization. Also, this is big too. Consider how data-driven customization also becomes highly relevant to each specific customer. So you can leverage customer-specific actions and plug in personalized customer data into email content. Being able to follow the customer's unique journey and then fire off a timely auto email with relevant messaging is such an awesome way to add to that white glove human touch experience to digital communication and take away that manual email effort that takes up a ton of the CSM's time.
Britt, I know you have another story you want to tell, an example you want to share. Before you do, I want to just reiterate what Madeline just said, because I think it's super important. I think it's one of those things, again, that is a little bit of a misperception or misconception about automation or digital CS, right? People think, oh, like you're trying to send my customers marketing emails and they're going to get all this stuff that feels really like spammy and weird and ruin this beautiful relationship we've built, right? Like that's totally not the point, right? It's how can we make it appear as if your CSM sent this email? It should be written like the CSM would write it. You should be able to reply directly to your CSM from it, right? All of those things, again, it's about just enabling the scalability of things your CSMs are already doing, not at all like, oh, hey, let's send them this fancy marketing email because we think it's cool, right? And I'm a marketer at heart, like I get it, I know it's a thing, I understand, but like that's just not what we're talking about. So I just wanted to reiterate. Sorry for interrupting. Go ahead, Britt.
No, that's good. And actually, as we're talking about this, I think there's a couple real life examples before I even go into the next thing I would talk about to answer your original question, just about this specifically, right? So Madeline kind of talked about like data-driven customizations for your customers, right? Perfect example of that's very real life is when customer usage of the app drops, right? If you guys have an application or your services, and if you can get that data first of all from your system or whatever it is that you're using to say, hey, this person's not engaged with us, and then start to tailor some messaging to them that's not manual, right? If I, as the CSM, get a notification that says, hey, by the way, they haven't logged in 3 months, that's certainly a risk to me, right? But if you can then get the system to say, hey, we noticed you haven't logged in 3 months, here's a quick little message on something, I don't know, it could be anything, right? Just here's a login, or hey, did you know you could do this? Like then it is, I mean, it starts to maybe go a little bit on the marketing side, but really is more like that value proposition that you're then able to add, right? I don't want to just ever reach out to my customers with like a, hey, you need to be using us. Instead, what I need to be doing is like helping them better adopt the system. That's what we're doing as customer success managers, right? Success is defined by the adoption and retention, for lack of a better phrasing, of our customers using our solutions, right? Anything outside of that becomes a risk. I don't necessarily want to only reach out when there are risk times, but that's certainly an advantage then if I know, and we talked about this earlier, like a customer health score, if I'm able to put together some data around what we think of a healthy customer looks like, whether that be like a combination of the gut check of the CSM who owns the relationship, the usage metrics, their last survey that they might have responded to, an NPS, if you're familiar with the Net Promoter Score, which is basically, for those who don't know, scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend this to a colleague or friend or whatever. And if they rate low but then still have high usage, then maybe it's somebody who's at the company that you need to then reach out to. As a CSM, I then have an action that I can go do. It can become a call to action when, and that's just another example, right? NPS comes back with low results, set an automation that says talk to the customer. Then that, it's not something that the customer is going to get overly overwhelmed with things that are coming from an automated system, but at least then they know, like, hey, we're interested in knowing why you might have rated this way, or whatever it may be. I will divert from there. I could soapbox on that for a minute, but to go back to the original question, like other ways, examples that we've seen automation like help CSMs and CS leaders make their lives easier. The other one that comes to mind is a specific set of tasks that we created at that same organization I was at a couple years ago for things like over usage, right? And I don't just mean over usage in like logging in, I mean over usage in like licensure. So an unexpected benefit then, and I guess I'm jumping ahead here a little bit, but an unexpected benefit was knowing when our customers were overusing on licenses, which for me, and in that role, it was a sales kind of CS role. I know not everyone does that. Sometimes it's a hybrid approach where sales and CS work collaboratively. But if I can automate those reminders to say, hey, your person's overusing their licenses, then what I can do as a CSM is reach out, right? First and foremost, not to go secure more licenses, though, that's a nice benefit. More importantly, to say like, hey, are you guys growing? What are, do we need to go provide some training to new people? Do we need to help you guys get more folks added to the system? Do we need to host some kind of education thing? Like really, and then start getting more information from them about how they're using the system, right? For me, that call to action to me is hugely advantageous for knowing my customer better. And then yes, the side benefit might be, oh, well, they added 5 new people. Cool, well, let's get you guys trued up on those licenses. Now, how do we take you with these 5 into what the next phase might be?
Yeah, I've really seen like firsthand at my previous SaaS company how leveraging automation through like product and feature updates can not only increase CSM time for efficiency, but also can increase customer capacity and time to onboard. I've really seen how automation can really drive customer adoption. And I think everything that we're speaking to and have spoken to at the end of the day really ties back to a main goal of increasing overall time savings for CS teams, which in turn increases cost savings and SaaS revenue. So the more that CSMs can tackle with automation, the more they're actually able to then focus their strategic efforts where they matter. And when it's done right, it's definitely a win for both the customer and your company.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's really important to think about, right? That's the why. I asked Britt earlier, like, why would a company do this? That's it. Time savings and additional capacity for your people, which leads to more revenue, right? Like that's the goal for every business. And yeah, we have to be super careful about, not breaking things that we've worked so hard to build along the way, but that's the ultimate goal here. So keeping that in mind, if, the goal is time savings, capacity, revenue, etc., what are sort of some of the little side unexpected benefits that you've either seen or would hope to see when using automation?
Yeah, the two that really come to mind right off the bat were, and we've kind of addressed a little bit earlier, the concept of like knowledge transfer and moving away from tribal knowledge. That's such a huge thing, especially as you scale. Not relying on what a CSM knows, but being able to rely on kind of like what we as a collective business know about our customer. So if I'm able to like track some of these touch points and what we talked about in these meetings and all of that is getting triggered to me in an automated fashion, right? Then my response to them that gets tracked in our CS tool or our CRM. Then when we bring on new people, or let's just go back to the example of the company I was working at. Moving to 200 accounts by the end of the year, what we ended up doing was we didn't actually necessarily bring on a bunch of new people. We did bring on a couple, but we ended up segmenting out in a way that we hadn't previously. And we did come up with our gold tier and like a silver tier. And our gold tier customers were the ones that we needed to spend more of that white glove approach on. That doesn't mean that we didn't still have automations in place and some tech touch along with it. But that gave us a little bit of a different way in which we manage those accounts. You know, I went back down to about 150 accounts, 50 or so of whom were people that I knew in and out. But then that meant 50 other accounts had to go to somebody else. And so we created this whole separate segmentation of people who were going to manage 300 accounts, 500 accounts. So being able to then take that knowledge that was all tracked inside of one system, the things that had been automated and beyond, and then bring that over to the new CSM meant that the transition for your customer and our customers in those cases was like relatively seamless. And that kind of leads me to the second one that really is a big thing, is like a standardization of customer journeys. If your customer can expect from you what your outreach and engagement is going to look like, both automated, and sometimes they know it's an automation, right? Sometimes they know it's a standard email that's coming, but a lot of times they know that like, oh, it's been 3 months since I talked to Britt. Maybe it's time either I call him or he's going to call me. Those are just some ways that the standardization of journey is really kind of key as well when you start talking about like operationalizing CS at large. And the benefit is you're doing that naturally as you start to build in automation, at least in some regard, and then you can build on it, kind of like what we've been talking about this whole time. Is you can build on some of the fundamentals that you can put in place, which are relatively simple at first. I'm going to jump ahead here and kind of summarize something that I missed earlier, but the idea when you're thinking about all of this is to think big, start small, and act fast. That's ultimately what you want to do. We know we have these big goals that we want to achieve over the next year. How do we do it? Well, I'm going to find these couple little small things and then build on it as we go.
Awesome. Thanks, Britt. And I'm going to go a tiny bit off script here because I want to bring up something that we haven't talked about that I think is important to just mention, right? Oftentimes, CS organizations get really, we're really attached to our customer relationships. They're really valuable. We really value them as a company. Those conversations one-on-one that our CSMs are having with customers are important to us. I think sometimes we forget that that's not actually always, sometimes it is, but it's not always what the customer wants, right? Sometimes the customer does want to be able to communicate with you in a more digital manner, doesn't necessarily want to get on the phone with you maybe once a quarter, but probably, I don't know, a lot of customers want to talk to you once a week, right? So having those touch points in between not only can benefit you, but I think it's really important to remember, in today's society, that's what most of us are used to, right? We're used to being able to access what we need from companies we're doing business with, either in our work lives or our personal lives, online in a digital manner. So just wanted to mention that. And then I want to leave time for questions. But first, Britt, I know you've shared your key takeaway: think big, start small, and act fast. So I want to ask Madeline to do the same thing. What's your big takeaway that you want to leave everybody with today, Madeline?
Yeah, for me, I think it's so important to really carve out dedicated time to learn from your CSMs first and foremost before you dive into any crazy automation. In a discovery phase, it's it's awesome to understand the CSM's daily activities and pain points. And you can really take some time to learn about the systems that they access and where manual processes are holding them up. And if you take the time to truly listen to your CSM team, there will more than likely be a handful of pain points that you can then quickly identify and solve for, even by starting small with automation. So once you start with some of those small but effective wins with your CS team that we've spoken to, that's when you really can start to get creative and robust and have some more technical fun with automation. So yeah, listen to the CSM. They know it best.
Love it. That's awesome. So Corey, I think we have some questions that
We
I've seen
do.
come through.
Yeah, we have a lot of questions. Firstly, thanks for that great conversation. And we had a lot of questions that came in, and I'd like to invite the rest of the audience to please go ahead and submit whatever other questions you have, as we have a good amount of time to try and get to as many as we can. So to start off, our first question that came in was, how do you take an existing customer journey and incorporate digital aspects into it?
Britt, I think you've done this recently, so do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, for sure. That's always a fun question in practice, right? Because a lot of times what you're doing is moving from something that is very human touch into something that is maybe less so. The easiest way to do that is don't necessarily automate stuff to the customer at first. Automate the stuff that is the repetitive tasks that I think Madeline was talking about earlier. What areas as a CSM am I having to go do all of the time? And I guess the flip side of that is what things am I just spending all of my time on? And that's what Metal was kind of talking about, right? If I, as the CSM, am being very vocal about my pain points, those are your really quick and easy wins to say, oh, well, if you're getting that vague, I'm spending too much time with, X number of customers, then maybe that's a separate thing. But if you're talking about just like actually developing a customer journey and some of these automation touch points, start with the internal stuff, then you can work out some of the bugs. And then you can move into things like automating some of those product updates, things that are going to your customers. And I think that's probably a really good thing to kind of talk through, especially if we're talking about product updates. And Madeline talked about that earlier as well, right? You can make it seem a little human touchy, but at the same time, it should look like a product update, right? It shouldn't look like something that's necessarily coming just from your CSM. That way they know it's like, hey, we as the company need to communicate something to you. Then the action item out of that from a CSM's perspective might be, well, I want to call and make sure you understood that like this is a new thing and I can do some education on it. So long-winded, but
Yeah, I would add to that as well. I think map out what that customer journey looks like, and then be able to attribute triggers and data-driven events that will start each journey stage for your customers, and apply customer segmentation here as well. So, for example, you can start any customer in the onboarding phase based off of a trigger like a closed won. And then you can associate an onboarding playbook, which incorporates that series of automated tasks and emails that then follow the onboarding flow, and apply that to that specific journey stage, and then consider what does it look like when a customer has transitioned then to adoption or value realization, and associate events with that. Maybe it's usage events, maybe it's product feature adoption events, and then put them into a new process with a different adoption playbook, and what does that workflow look like, and what does that task sequence look like, and so on. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I think those are some really great tips for, some quick wins with incorporating digital components. Our next question, and I think this is a really good question that I have to imagine most companies struggle with when starting to add in automated things. So the question is, any tips on how to orchestrate a calm schedule between automated emails and direct CSM outreach? We are on this journey and are concerned about overwhelming our users with outreach, double touches, etc. We don't want to keep CSMs from reaching out to their users, but don't want to step on the toes of the don't want to step on each other's toes, which ultimately leads to poor user experience. Any advice?
This is such a good question. It is a
Mhm.
question that I'm 99% sure every single ESG customer has asked us. So maybe it's one of them asking again. I don't know. So really the key here is visibility in all directions, right? So, and it's not even just within CS. Think about some product teams are sending their own product updates, right? Some support teams are sending their own surveys. Some companies have their own actual dedicated customer marketing team for cross sells and upsells. Like it's not just within CS, which sorry, I maybe just made your problem worse. But it's all about the visibility, right? So it's a really important exercise to anybody who's sending any kind of messaging to your customers, whether they're in CS or not, make a map, make a calendar, right? I've seen it done just on like a shared Google Calendar that everybody has access to, and there are certain parameters of who's allowed to add or change or move and when and why. There certainly are tools and systems that you can use for that too, but regardless of sort of the what you're doing it in, the key here is just that visibility. So everybody knows sort of what usually there's like a priority level of, this department gets kind of first dibs, this department is next, and so on. And then everybody can see what those are. And if there's something that, comes up and we're like, hey, I'm so sorry, can we move this because this reason? Just have those communication channels open internally among, the various stakeholders. And it's never easy. Like sometimes it gets sticky and you got to move stuff and it can be stressful, but I think it's important enough, right? To your point in the question, like creating that experience for your customers is important enough that it's worth the extra work to just be very, to over communicate, I think, in that.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that actually is kind of the beginning of a good customer journey map
Yes.
exercise post sale, right? Once they truly become a customer, is we need to know who all the other departments are working with our customer on, because that does affect our overall customer experience. And if customer experience dips because of, like we said, overstepping, some people, just sending automated emails that seem easy, that can lead to churn risks that you can't manage as the CSM, right? I can't help that 4 teams sent an email on the same day, 2 of which was the same information and other ones were kind of useless. Like that's just super vital. But then you can also start pinpointing where some of your other teams might not realize that what they do affects the customer and the customer experience. That's just a huge thing for, especially as you're like growing as a CS team and growing as an organization who's adopting CS. Like a lot of times you're retrofitting customer success into an existing organization. That's a lot of the people who we work with. So getting like executive leadership and buy-in from the higher ups to say, hey, well, we know our customer experience is really good when these things happen, and this calendar is a really good way to like point to like, hey, look at all the successes we've seen from this, especially if you can then go like track metrics on like customer open rates and when customers respond, who they're responding to, that kind of stuff.
Awesome. So our next question is, one of my pain points is that CSMs feel sending product info to customers may be considered spamming. Any suggestions or creative ways to still get that information out without seeming spammy?
Like all of us could answer this one. Who wants it?
Yeah, I can definitely take a stab at that. So I think that I actually, at my last company, we had a similar pain point. And so I can totally sympathize with the sentiment here. I think that there are ways that you can make a product update email and an automated alert come across, like we spoke about before, like that it's coming specifically from the CSM based off of that customer specific experience. And this can also help to reduce potential CSM touch points with the customer, and reduce like call time, I would say. One way that we did this was have the CSMs record like a Loom video, which served as kind of a how-to guide, that came across as very personable to the customer. And it was more like, hey, I noticed that you haven't been using or utilizing this particular feature within the product. Here's how you can do it. And it reduced the amount of training and enablement and onboarding that we had to do for our customers. So I think there's ways to get creative with it that where automation can really make it seem like it's coming directly from the CSM. And I think keeping in mind to what Britt spoke to, it's like really considering how much engagement the customer is getting, and how you might be able to make it as relevant as you can.
Yeah, and at the risk of talking too much, the other thing that comes to mind though as we're talking about this is like you're really starting to ask questions that are really good for those second two tiers of automation, right? You've moved past the quick wins, and now you're starting to think about like other channels we can reach a customer on. Any kind of email is going to either risk sounding like spam in the sense that you're sending an email to somebody with a bunch of information, regardless of who it comes from sometimes. But if you can, like Madeline said, you're dropping a video to them, or creating a link to like maybe there's some common YouTube thing, and you're automating like, hey, did you see this? I mean, they always run that risk of spammy, but something that we're doing now with one of the engagements that I'm working on is like in-app updates that are coming. Like we found a way to build in new feature releases, and actually we've seen since we released that a huge increase in engagement of customers who are actually not just like clicking on the like I see a red flag, and that's kind of like the experience, right? Is like I see a little red bubble and I need to go clear it. But not just seeing the red bubble, but then saying, oh, well, it's specific to new features. Let's click on new features, and then saying, oh, wow, they just released this cool new thing. And here's a link to actually seeing how to do that either in the app or through a video or whatever. So that experience kind of shifted away. The focus isn't the CSM doing that action anymore. Again, I as a CSM could have an action off of it. If I see customers either have or haven't, then I can call the customer and engage with them in some other way. That's my high touch function, but at least I've provided it to a customer, and then again being able to track those metrics to say, hey, we have really great engagement in this particular method, and you get to get creative with it. That's kind of the beautiful thing of building in automations, is like the sky really is the limit. Don't say like it has to come from a certain tool or certain program that we use, or it's all going to be just a templated something. Like really, you can do an infinite number of things to as ways to engage the customer, especially now where everyone is like Marley was talking about, consuming in a self-serve capacity is like a huge thing. So if I'm consuming on Instagram or Facebook, and I know like those are probably not the most common places you look on business, but LinkedIn is, YouTube is. So if I'm creating content that can live on those spaces, and then when I'm pointing people to, or somebody else has created content, right? What I'm pointing people to then is not just something that's always from me. I'm trying to then provide some value as the CSM. So then being able to automate it, some of that stuff, rather than just something that always looks like it's coming from me on a schedule. Those are just a couple ways, but yeah, the sky really is the limit.
And I want to make just one more very quick point about this question. I thought it was really interesting that maybe this was like a Freudian slip by the question asker, but that specifically they said product info, right? Their CSMs thought could be spammy. I'm super surprised to hear that specifically. I've heard like, usage stuff, or the I'm just checking in to check in stuff can feel spammy. But if you think about it from a user perspective, right? If there was, I'm not talking small product updates, but if there was like a major product update to something I'm used to using every day and I didn't know about it as a user before it happened, I would be very upset, right? Like I want to know when, especially those big things are happening. So I think that's just kind of an important perspective to consider in that regard as well.
Awesome. All great advice. Yeah, I mean, I know we tell our customers data and stuff like this helps you be real time. So it takes, actioning and talking to your customers in real time based off of things they're doing really, I think, takes you out of that spammy level a little bit. It's not just mass email to everyone just saying something, but more targeted. So we have another question. I don't know if this is tricky, so if this is just one that seemed interesting, but they were curious if would you say is an acceptable amount to CSM ratio of accounts for a tech touch segment, assuming fully automation and stable level of delivery maturity. So the question is like any recommendations for CSM ratio in a tech touch environment model rather.
Yeah, there are just so many other factors. I don't want to misquote, but other things to consider besides just, okay, it's a tech touch model. How many customers do I have? How many customers do you have total? How many CSMs do you have total today? Start with that math and see where it gets you, right? That might not be right, but what do you have currently? Think about if you can do a time spend analysis of your CSMs realistically, like how much time are they actually spending doing the things that you want them to do? That's a really good place to start for the calculation. And then there's also sort of how complicated is your product, right? If it's something really simple, your CSMs can have more accounts. If it's a really complicated product, they can't, right? So I don't know if either of you have other things you want to say, but there's no perfect formula. Sometimes it's trial and error too, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I was thinking is like the product maturity, the maturity of your customers, the ease of self-serve, like that, those are all huge factors that go into it. And I kind of want to take this one because I've seen opposite ends of the spectrum where even with like a lot of maturity, some CSMs can only manage like 20 accounts, right? And you're talking about a pretty complex product and you're talking about accounts in the retention space of millions of dollars. Maybe you don't want a ton of customers to go to a CSM when customers are spending that much, right? You want to give them that full white glove approach. And then the flip side is like a relatively simple product, they're spending a couple $100 a year or whatever. You can be an infinite number of customers, right? Because what you're trying to do is automate everybody as much as you can to streamline and keep costs low, right? That's ultimately what you're after in business in general is like, how can we increase our revenue and increase our bottom line and keep costs low? And like, those are the things that companies always end up talking about, whether it's at the CS level or not. Those are always the things that the CEO and CFO are having those conversations about behind closed doors, sometimes very publicly. But those are the things that you really have to take into account. We definitely can't say like one CSM per 150 customers and like leave it flat like that and say that's it. I think it really is going to be dependent on like Marley said, that time spend. If you see that 100 accounts is just blowing your CSMs out of the water and they don't have any time and they're leaving miserable, then it's time to evaluate. On the other hand, if they seem like they got a lot of time, that's another evaluation point. Like maybe we can give them more. Maybe we can find other ways to grow and like that's a good thing.
Absolutely. Our next question is, high-touch CSMs have a lot on their plate. Any points in the customer life cycle that would be prime for setting up automated comms?
Onboarding and renewal. Yeah. The bookends. And really, yeah, like the onboarding piece is huge because again, when we're talking about like standardizing customer journey and customer experience, you can really find a way to automate basically everything up to the point that they're moving into adoption. Everyone's adoption might look different. And then again, the renewal piece, getting that started early, especially, so you're not waiting to reach out like the month someone renews, but like you're making some kind of standardization along the way to keep the customer engaged. Those are the two that I would say.
Yeah. 100%. I think renewals can be completely automated. Also, there's a lot of automation you can do with QBRs and service reviews as well.
Yeah, sort of standardized touch points. If you have processes in place that are like already very standardized, that's another good place to look for, what could be some quick wins, early wins with automation. How can we just automate these things that already are happening today?
Yep.
Awesome. Well, that brings us to the end of our webinar, and I would like to thank everyone from ESG for joining us and sharing their great insights on high touch and automation. And I would like to remind everyone that we will be sending out the recording of this webinar tomorrow. And please take a moment to provide your feedback in the quick survey that will pop up at the end of this webinar. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again for joining, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.